Good afternoon, Frank.
Hello, Professor.
Very cold day, but it's not actually cold that's on my mind this week. It's the another part of the world, the tropics, which I think is in many ways providing a model for us for what to expect in the future as globalization continues to progress, because I think it's in the countries where change is happening fastest, which where they're beginning to experience things which haven't yet fully begun for us. Everybody paid throughout the world a lot of attention in, I think it was December, but it may be longer ago than that now, for that terrible rape case in Delhi, where a young woman was repeatedly raped and seriously physically abused in a bus that kept on running through the streets in Delhi. And now the court case has started. And along with the court case, a lot of other information has, a lot of other things have come into the news, and there's a lot of people discussing the general situation in India. And of course, nearly all the discussion deals with just India, as though India is special, and this is something cultural about the Indians, that they're just beastly to women. And it doesn't put it in the larger world context, where obviously there's been a problem, a gender problem, for a very long time. In my opinion, since the beginnings of the sedentarization and food production, at least, if not ever since before that. But the interesting thing in India is that people are saying now that maybe it has something to do with changing sex ratios.
Okay.
That in recent years, people who would far rather have sons than daughters anyway, and one of the reasons they don't want daughters is that you have to find a dowry for them in order to get them off your hands financially. Whereas sons do useful things for you, forgetting that if your son is going to need a wife, and if you don't have any daughters, other people probably won't have daughters, and your son won't find a wife.
Right.
But that's the problem of the tragedy of the commons. However, the argument runs that because it became possible for families to find out the sex of their infant before it was born, they decided to abort a lot of females and keep males, so that the sex ratio in the younger generation began to change, and gradually it's been changing to a more significant degree, and the change has been moving through the age span. It's now got to a point where there are too many males for the number of females in large cities in India. And of course, it's particularly in the large cities where public behavior is not fully controlled, and problem situations like this arise. So it's interesting that this comes to light in this way, and people start talking about it and putting things together, and putting more things together than they had done before. But I think we have a tendency to keep things in boxes and talk about everything we can find in that box, and not relate it too much to what might be in other boxes. And it would be interesting to see rape figures for every country in the world. But even if we could, I'm not sure that they would be a terribly good guide, because I suspect that they are not a very good indicator of reality in any situation, because so many rapes occur that don't get reported.
Right. Well, the first obvious point that comes to mind is that China, of course, with their one-child policy and the sex preference emphasis there as well, you would think that there are demographically more males in a specific age cohort since that policy went into place than there are females. I'm wondering what the rape incidents are in China, if anyone knows.
Yes, I mean, the Chinese situation is particularly interesting, because if you can only have one child, it's surprising how many of those single children turn out to be males.
Yes.
But I think that the point here is to get some sense of whether the amount of violence is really increasing as a result of the problem in the sex ratio, or whether it's part of violence towards women, or whether it's part of a general rise in violence that is happening because of other factors.
Mm-hmm.
And my sense of what's been going on in different parts of the world generally over the last 50 years is that there was much less violence, really significantly lower degree of violence in public life in almost every country in the world in the middle of the last century.
Mm-hmm.
And that the incidence of violence has been increasing everywhere. In this country, violence on the streets began to rise, I think, in the 60s, possibly in the late 50s.
Mm-hmm.
And when I came here in the late 60s, and especially in the 70s, it was a big concern in the streets of Philadelphia. At that time, it was not a concern in London or in other major European cities, but later in the 70s, it became a concern there. And it's more recently than that become a concern in India and Pakistan. And I remember that up until the 90s in Iran, you could go anywhere in Iran and big cities or countryside, and you would never be worried about violence.
Mm-hmm.
But now violence is a serious problem in public situations everywhere in Iran.
Mm-hmm.
And the government has recently, as you may have seen, instituted public hanging as a deterrent to try to stop people resorting to violence. You were going to say something, or?
Well, first of all, I'm assuming that we're going to completely set apart for purposes of this discussion any politically motivated violence, right? I mean, it's not like Boko Haram down in Nigeria.
Yeah.
So we'll set that apart. So we're talking about.
I mean, it may come in later, but.
Yeah, but we're talking, God forbid, plain old-fashioned violence.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. And then the next thing I would think is that, as you were saying this, of course, it's all true, but it's occurring to me, my goodness, in this time and era, with the kind of communications capability and the interactions socially that are permitted because of technology that we often talk about. I mean, you would think, if anything, that the gravitational pull is pulling people closer together, rather than resulting in these outliers that feel they can do physical violence as they wish to anybody that they want at any time. And then the next thing that came to my mind is it because of an inequality issue that people feel, that they don't have something that other people have. In the situation in India, if I remember correctly, the woman was a professional. I think she might have been a nurse on a bus, sort of a medium distance bus that cost some money to get on in the first place, with her husband. And the people who attacked her, I don't think socioeconomically were in that same group.
No.
And I suppose that in one respect, the bonds that are tying us more closely together are also making people more aware of inequality divisions.
Well, what I was going to say was that the bonds that are bringing us all into closer interaction with each other,
That's a better way to say it,
are also disrupting our local ties, so that the relationships that we depended upon in our daily lives, in the community that had a structure that told us who we were in relation to everybody else and what we did in relation to what they did and why they might have things that we didn't have, that's all been disrupted. And at the same time, we're much more aware of what's going on everywhere else in the rest of the world, and how big the differentiations are on a personal level between what people have in different places. And so we know of so many more different possibilities. And so the knowledge of this enormous variety of conditions of human life, on the one hand, relates to our conflicts with our sense of what we ought to be doing as individuals. We've lost the sense of our duties as an individual in relation to the people who are dependent upon us and on whom we're dependent in our local community.
Let me pose this to you. Do you think there's a rough parallel between, for example, the advent of television and that unreal world that those 1950s and 60s TV shows showed normal families, happy life, and just people cavorting around and like
I think that probably television is part of this because it puts people in contact with a world beyond their own awareness, beyond their own experience.
but often a world that is false. I mean,
Yeah.
a family situation that exists as a result of a TV scriptwriter's vision is not resembling a regular family situation.
No,
at
but
all.
it's all based on human current models. It's not even science fiction, after all. It's based on human ideas.
Right, right. I think I'm thinking of those early shows, Father Knows Best, and those other shows with Fred McMurray and those things, which completely painted a very romanticized view of the family. And so when people would be watching those shows, comparing this happy life that they're seeing on their black and white TV sets with regular arguments going on in their own home, they were like, oh my goodness, I mean, we're so abnormal, we're different. I don't think that helped.
Well, now, of course, the big programs that get so much attention are programs like Friends and Girls, and which paint a very different type of interaction among people of a particular age group. And then, on the other hand, a large number of people spend all their time playing video games, which are violence.
I'll tell you something else. I don't know if you've seen this. I suspect you haven't because I know you don't watch much television. But around Christmas time, there are a number of car commercials, automobile commercials. And there was a commercial for Acura, which I believe is it's a high-end Honda vehicle. And there has Christmas-type theme music in the background, nice snowy outside, and a nice house, and a young woman in the house on a social site that looks suspiciously like Facebook, and she's facing that choice to hit the button like or friend somebody, and then the stentorian narrative voice is saying, "This holiday season, why stay at home and imagine what you could be doing? Get out and do it." So the woman then, in response to this voice, gets out, gets into her brand new Acura, and drives to a restaurant where she's warmly welcomed by all of her friends. And I looked at this and I was like, my God, I mean, Madison Avenue has figured it out. This is aimed at those people who sit at home and don't have, I mean, it's a disgusting way they did it to sell a car, but it's aimed at people sitting at home, just friending people and living vicariously on the internet when they should be going out, experiencing face-to-face interactions with people.
Anyway, what I was going to drive this argument towards was the idea that, on the one hand, information is becoming uncontrollable, so that you can't count on the privacy of any information anymore. And we're going to enormous lengths in order to maintain the privacy of some information. We keep losing those battles, and it's beginning to reach into the rights of authors and filmmakers,
songwriters,
and on the other hand, at the same time, the degree of violence in everyday life is also rising, so that it's very difficult to know where you can wander about safely without any threat of violence at all. And there's all sorts of things going on in the modern world that might be part of the motivation for the connection between knowing more and being more violent. And one of them may be what everybody now knows about the military operations of Western armies and other armies for that matter, because so many innocent people get killed all the time. And that presumably can be adopted. The same model can be adopted by international terrorists who are trying to get their own back against the West anyway. So this sounds like a pessimistic argument.
Yes.
But I think that the problem even though it sounds pessimistic, is that it's a type of change which none of our policymakers thinks in terms of at the moment, because we bracket everything under rights and privacy, without realizing that the way the world is changing is producing a qualitatively completely new situation that needs to be handled in a very different way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've said before that I don't think that 300 million people claiming to be a democratic society but having to make up their minds between one of only two presidential candidates is terribly democratic.
No, that's true. That's a good observation.
That's just one extreme example of the problems that we're beginning to face.
But yet again, it's precisely perhaps that lack of choice which herds people into these other forms so they can expand their choice parameters in this alternative world of virtual reality.
So I think there's a lot more to be said about globalization in relation to the way it's making information uncontrollable, and violence also
more accepted,
more common and more difficult to control.
Well, this could be a very interesting topic for future discussions.
We'll see where it leads next week.
Yes. All right. Thank you, Professor.